Like everybody stand and do the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please join me in prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we thank you for this evening. We thank you for the freedom to gather together and hear from the candidates that have graciously and bravely put their names forward to be the next governor of the state of Minnesota. And Father, I pray your blessing upon them, upon their answers this evening. And I pray that you bless their families, as it's a stress on families to have someone running in a statewide race. So please bless them and their families, keep them safe on the roads, and watch over their families when they're not there. And Father, we just thank you for each person in this room, and pray that tonight would be an evening of information and also just a time of enjoying one another's company as fellow conservatives. We thank you, Lord Jesus, in your name. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
So I'm going to be very quick because I want to get on to the main event. But I want to welcome everybody here. I especially want to welcome the candidates. I want to thank you for taking the time away from the campaign and be with us here tonight. I very much appreciate that. We very much appreciate that. And I want to welcome everybody here as well. Thank you for coming out. I'm not going to hit on any local BPU stuff, other than to say on the back of your program, it has all the candidate bios, is a lot of upcoming events. So all about the events that are, BPU events on the back of your program. I do want to mention a couple of details about the event. First of all, the seating and the questions were all picked at random. Just to make sure everybody understands that. Also, I want to mention that this is a forum, not a debate. So we're going to ask the candidates not to address the other candidates directly, or mention them in their answers. We're looking to find out what your position are on the different issues. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for opening statements. Each candidate will be given every question, and they'll have 90 seconds to respond. And then each candidate will have 3 minutes closing statements. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderators this evening, Commissioner Matt Look and Heather Lordish. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Heather and I would like to welcome everyone. Thank you for those who came out this evening. Special thank you to all the candidates as well for coming out, taking time out of their very busy schedules to be with us this evening. I also want to say thank you to those that helped organize this evening. There were many hours that went into putting this together, and thanks to their work, we, I believe, have a unique opportunity to hear from 5 highly qualified candidates, in my opinion, this will promise to be a wonderful evening. So one last rule, by the way, the questions that we're going to read off, if the other candidates that aren't answering the first question can write it down so that we can try to keep moving along without having to repeat that question, that would be great. So without further ado, we will start off with the opening statements, and we'll start off with Mr. Beaver.
Well, thank you, Matt, and thanks to everybody who's here tonight. My name is Matt Dean, and I'm running for governor. I represent the White Bear Lake area in the Minnesota House, where I currently serve as the chair of the Health and Human Services Finance Committee. Previous to that, I was majority leader, and I've served in the majority and the minority under Governor Pawlenty and under Governor Dayton. And I can tell you that serving under Governor Dayton and putting budgets together and negotiating bills has caused me an unbelievable urgency to take this state back in the right direction, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We as Republicans need to unify, and we need to win. That's very important. I was born on the Iron Range. I grew up on the east side of St. Paul. I met my wife Laura in kindergarten. We've got 3 great kids, Marta, Jack, and Jane, 2 in college, 1 in high school, and we really want them to experience the Minnesota that we did as well. You here have an incredible opportunity, and you've got an incredible challenge in replacing Abigail Whalen, one of the brightest stars of the legislature. It's truly been an honor to see somebody grow so much, and somebody who's been able to contribute so much with so much integrity in a very short time at a very young age. And we are so blessed to have her. And thank you for sending us, Abigail, and your work is cut out for you to replace her at the Capitol. So thanks for sending us, Abigail. We love it. Questions. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Well, thank you. I'm Jeff Johnson. I'm also running for governor, and I want to thank you for being here, number one, but more importantly for everything you do for those of us who run for office. We do appreciate it. A little background on me. My wife Sandy and I were born and raised in northern Minnesota. We have been in Plymouth now for 20 or so years. We have 2 teenage boys. Thor is in college. Rolf is in high school. I have spent most of my adult life in the private sector, and during that time I also served 6 years in the Minnesota House, and now I'm in my 3rd and final term on the Hennepin County Board as the very lonely but loud voice of sanity in the heart of Minneapolis. And I'm running for governor for a really simple reason: to take power away from government and to give it back to the people of Minnesota where it belongs. We have seen just an out-of-control trend the past decade or so where government is taking too much, it's spending too much, it's doing too much, and that will change when I'm governor. It's the reason I'm running, and I'm excited over the next hour to share some of the specifics about that with you. But I can boil it down right now to this. We're going to change the attitude in government, the culture in government, from that of controlling people and directing people and bullying people to that of actually serving the people who pay our salaries. And if there's a government employee who refuses to get on board with that, whether they're in the DNR or the PCA or the Department of Commerce or the Department of Human Services, if there's a government employee who refuses to buy in, they're not going to survive the Johnson administration. Folks, I think it's time that we clean house in some of the state agencies, because people do not exist to fund government. Government exists to serve people, and that's what I will wake up every day thinking about as your governor. So I'm excited for tonight, and thank you for having us.
Thank you, too, for coming out. My name's Keith Downey. Guess what? I'm running for governor, too, as you might imagine. And Brad, this is not a distraction from our campaigns. This is the campaign. So it's great to be here with you and have a chance to share our vision for the future of our state. For those of you who don't know me, I actually was in business for about 23 years before serving in the Minnesota House for 4 years. Offered a lot of reform proposals while I was there, and then chaired the state Republican Party of Minnesota, where we had a substantial turnaround to effect, and I'm thankful that we did. And when I completed that last May, my wife and I thought about whether or not there's another chapter in this political adventure. And as we thought about whether I should throw my hat in the ring, we took stock of our family first of all, and thank the Lord we're in a strong enough position that we can do this, not just run, but actually serve 4 full years. And we also talked about what it would take to win. And we decided that if I ran, that I was going to be bold. And my wife said, you got to go out and tell people exactly what you think and exactly why what you believe and what you're proposing is right for them and it's right for our state. And I don't know about you, but I'm pretty tired of losing. And we've been running the same formula here. We describe the problems, we prescribe solutions, we explain, we complain, and we're never on offense. And I don't know if it's because we don't believe what we believe enough or what, but we're going to be bold in this campaign. I'm going to fight hard for your endorsement. I'm going to fight hard in the primary if I have to fight it. I'm going to fight incredibly hard in the general election, because I think that's what people are starved for. They are sick and tired of what's happening in St. Paul and Washington, D.C. They have no confidence in the political class of politicians or government, and we have an opportunity this year as Republicans to go out and stand for the little guy, fight for average everyday people against the entrenched special interests, and take it on and tell them what we really think and why we're the right solution for them. And if we do that, we'll win.
Hi, I'm Philip Parrish. I've met many of you, and I'm very grateful to see all the new faces tonight as well. I hope to get a chance to visit with you more tonight. I know that the time is limited, so I'm really encouraging you to go to the website and the social media accounts, read up on what's going on, really get caught up in the news, especially in the last 4 or 5 days, and tell us what you think. And I'd like to tell just a very brief a little bit about me, and then hopefully we'll get into the depth of this during the questions. I'm a teacher, I'm a principal. And then as a 29 years now as a licensed education professional, I was also a Navy intelligence reservist. And as a Navy intelligence specialist, enlisted for 9.5 years, and then was offered a direct commission as a Navy intelligence officer. I specialize in counterterrorism and foreign policy. What does any of that got to do with running for governor? My administrative work and my intelligence work have led to a knowledge base of how things run, how things operate, that is very unusual. I'm an extremely good investigator, and one of the motivations for running for governor were, in my last set of duties, the opportunity, well, I don't know if you want to call it an opportunity, right place, right time, wrong place, wrong time, depending on how you look at life. I've discovered some very disturbing things about Minnesota that many of you across the state are expressing, that you know what's going on as well. Believe it or not, that's a bit encouraging to me, because oftentimes as law enforcement intelligence officers in the background, we often think people really don't care. But I'm here to tell you there's a wave of people across the state that really do care about what's going on in Minnesota, how we're being exploited, how we're being manipulated, how our taxation is destroying our state, and how people are leaving the state in droves because of our taxation schemes. So I hope to talk to you more as the debate goes on. Or foreign, sorry.
Much like our country in 2016, Minnesota stands at a crossroads in our state's history. We have an opportunity under the Trump administration policies to redesign healthcare in Minnesota and to provide that much needed tax relief to our families and our businesses. I did a little research. Minnesota's been a state for 160 years, and did you know that never in the history have the Democrats held the office of governor for 12 consecutive years? Not once. I'm Mary Giuliani Stevens, and if I'm your Republican endorsed candidate, they won't. I'm running because Minnesota families, our businesses, our farmers, they can't afford 4 more years of a Democrat in the governor's chair. Elect me, and the Democrat dysfunction will stop at 8. Even the DFL is concerned about my candidacy. Let me read you a short excerpt from the Star and Tribune article. A DFL operative said that their side should be terrified of Woodbury Mayor Mary Giuliani Stevens because she is a smart, sensible, suburban woman who can crack the GOP statewide losing streak. Well, the DFL know they've lost Greater Minnesota, but the DFL also know that they cannot win without winning with us. We have to win the suburban communities to outshine their great hold in Minneapolis and St. Paul. As a city council member and as a mayor of the 9th largest city in Minnesota, I have consistently won suburban swing and independent voters, and I'll do it as candidate for governor. I'm the only candidate that has effectively run government. As a mayor, I have executive experience in balancing budgets, proposing conservative policies, and getting things done. And I have the grit and determination. Thank you very much, and I look forward to this evening. Thank you.
I want to take a minute also to thank the candidates for being here tonight. We really appreciate your time and are looking forward to your thoughtful answers that will give a little bit more insight into who you are, and to the audience for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here and learn a little bit about our candidates. The first question that we will ask tonight is, what skills, experiences, and or core values do you possess which uniquely qualifies you to run and win the governor's seat and to best fulfill the leadership role of governor? Mr. Johnson, we'll start with you.
Well, thank you. I would say that I think one thing that actually sets me apart in this race is my real life background. As I mentioned at the beginning, I've spent more than half my life in the private sector, the last 16 years actually being self-employed. But add to that the fact that I have served for 6 years in the State House, which is a self-imposed term limit, partially a wife-imposed term limit, but we agreed on that. And now the last 9 years in county government. And I believe that if you really want to fundamentally change state government, you need to go in understanding state government. And while I don't think most people are looking for career politicians anymore. I think they are looking for someone who actually has that experience but has spent most of their time in the private sector, both as an employee, as an employer, and now being self-employed these past 16 years. So I think that life experience actually sets me apart from anyone else in this race. The other piece that I think makes me unique is my geographic background. We're very divided as a state right now. And it's not just metro-rural, it is greater Minnesota, suburban Minnesota, and urban Minnesota. And there's no one else in this race that can bridge all three of those, because I spent the first half of my life in greater Minnesota. My wife and I have lived in suburban Minnesota for the past 20-some years, and the last 9 years I've been in Minneapolis for every single week, not as a candidate, but trying to solve some of the most difficult problems that plague the urban core. So I think I can bridge that gap better than anyone else.
Mr. Dunn.
So actually quite a few questions in there. First of all, I think what people are looking for is somebody who's going to talk straight with them. Tell them exactly what's happening and what they believe and why they believe it, and then make sure that they do it when they get down to St. Paul. People are sick and tired of politicians who go out and lay out the old formulas and then get down to St. Paul, Washington, D.C., and nothing happens. Nothing happens, and they're sick and tired of it, and I'm sick and tired of it. So I committed to be bold in this campaign, and I have put out 8 policy initiatives that go really deep, that show that actually, you know what, as a candidate, I do know how the bureaucracy operates. I do know how to take 15% out of that spending. I do know what will reinvigorate the private sector based on my background, and I have the will to get in there and actually do it and take on the entrenched special interests. And that, in my mind, is the essence of this election. We can talk all we want about our policies and our skills and our backgrounds, and you know what? The people are looking for somebody who will take on the machine for them, who will fight for them. That is the essence of this election. That is how we win. And you talk about governing and getting something done. Let me tell you, you go out and tell the people of Minnesota exactly why you're running, exactly what you're going to do, and you win this election. You go to St. Paul with the people at your back. Then you can govern. Then you can lead, then you can adopt your agenda, regardless of the entrenched interest in the legislature, in the lobbying community, wherever it is. If you have the people with you, and you enter the governor's office, you can get your agenda accomplished. I think that's how we win, and that's how I get my agenda accomplished when I'm there.
I have a set of skills that you've actually helped me train for. You've paid for those skills. That honor, courage, and commitment that I committed to in the U.S. Navy, I live, eat, and breathe that stuff every day. You've paid me to do a job for almost 20 years now that speaks to those ethics and morals and character every day of my life. And I will never, ever forget my oath any second of any day. I'll be there fighting for you. I'll be there making sure I investigate every single agency and program in the state of Minnesota. I will personally investigate all 103 plus agencies and programs in Minnesota. The core values that I live with every day are the core values that we need to return to in our legislative and executive office. All of us are tired. I'm not a politician. We're tired of what we're seeing, the lack of dignity, the lack of respect, the lack of connecting and resonating with those who are getting up every day, trying to feed their kids, going to work 10, 12 hours, 6 days a week, some of them. Sometimes people are working the first job 5 days a week and then working all weekend at the second or third job. And the disconnect from our leadership that we've elected, no offense to anyone in this room, because I know that there's good people in this room that are working their tails off as elected officials. But the fact is the disconnect is real and it has to stop.
Skills, experience, and core values that I bring to this race. I'd say my skills come from my education and my practice as a litigation attorney and having to be strong and stand up for the client that you're representing. My skills also come from being a mom and a grandma and raising a family while I'm working. Skills in being an attorney to mediate and get people across the table to come up with a solution. My experience also in my practice of law, but most importantly in what I shared in my opening, my experience of actually effectively running government. of being the mayor of the 9th largest city in Minnesota and making sure, because the cities are kind of down there, we can't pass anything on to anybody else, that we are efficient and effective and doing the minimum things that we're supposed to do to provide the services to our community. Core values, my personal core values are faith, and my family taught me the value of hard work, lots of grit in that Italian family, honesty, and the importance of family. What I bring to government is my understanding of government's role, what it should do and what it shouldn't do, the limited role of government, my belief in the free market system, and my belief that we need an efficient and effective government focusing on the things that they're supposed to do and getting out of the way of the things that they're not supposed to do. So Americans and Minnesotans have an opportunity to go out and be the best that they can be, putting money in their own pockets, making decisions for their own family. Thank you.
Well, as an architect by training and by my business, it brought me to a lot of job sites. And when you're an architect and you're building a building, you have to get a building built at a certain time on a day for a certain amount of money. And you have to do regular job site visits. And sometimes that means that people who don't necessarily have the same goals have to get along to get something done. And sometimes that means that you have to separate a fight between a plumber, an electrician, and a carpenter, and they're all twice as big as you. Now, the owner does not care whose fault it is, but it's my job to figure it out and make sure that there's no change orders. That's the kind of a thing that we need to do in government. We need to actually solve problems, have deliverable results without bringing fights back to the owners, which is the people. And the best advice I've gotten so far is from a guy up in Pennington County, and he said, you know, Matt, don't tell me who you're going to beat, tell me what you're going to do. That's what people are looking for. In Washington, D.C. and in St. Paul, Minnesota, they want a leader with a positive, hopeful, and optimistic vision that they can actually get people behind, and not just Republicans, but Democrats and everybody else moving the state in the same direction. That positive, hopeful, and optimistic vision is going to be what gets us over the top to win the election and actually allows us to govern. So I look forward to doing that, and I thank you for your opportunity.
Thank you, candidates. The first round of questions are complete. You did a great job. The second question will go to Keith Downey, and it is a two-part question. It was recently estimated that the state's budget will be running a deficit. How would you overcome the deficit? And in your opinion, what do you see as the current budget cost drivers?
Well, actually, I think the subsequent revision of the budget after the passage of the Trump tax credits is going to show a very different scenario, and some other healthcare funding will change that. So we probably will have a surplus again. And I might remind people that we had a $2 billion surplus 4 years ago, and we had a $1.6 billion surplus just recently. And guess what? We spent 80% of it. So it doesn't matter whether we have a surplus or a deficit down in St. Paul. People are going to spend. And the Democrats are all lined up to fund a gas tax and big spending increases and Medicare for all and all this government largesse. So I've actually proposed an initiative, smaller, better, cheaper, I'm calling it, a 15% reduction in our state budget. Not a reduction in the increase that Democrats and others might try to call a cut, but an actual reduction in the state budget. And we can do it. I proposed it 6 years ago when I was in the legislature, and I have the proposals to actually add that up. So I think we need to cut through the fog of the rhetoric down in St. Paul about deficits and surpluses, and let's cut to the meat of the matter. State spending is growing twice the rate of the economy for 30 years. It's unsustainable. It is crowding out the private sector in this state. We're not growing in the places that we need to grow. The growth in our economy is in government-funded sectors, and the only way you provide that kind of relief to the private sector and grow is through cuts to the state budget. I've got the proposal to do it. I've got the will to do it. It's what we need to do, and I think if we go out and tell the people of Minnesota the straight scoop, they'll side with us.
So isn't that fun and interesting? We went from a surplus and talking all kinds of things about surpluses just months ago with Governor Dayton, and now we're talking about forecasting a deficit. Big surprise. The fact is there was never a surplus to begin with. We have the top tier of wealth wealth generators in the state have left the state. We have the second tier of wealth trying to leave the state. We have senior citizens and retirees treated like absolute garbage in our state. Taxation to the point where it's almost like forcing them out. One could make a legitimate legal case that our senior citizens and retirees are being forced out of the state because of the taxation schemes. And then we have this wonderful, compassionate program called the Immigration and Refugee Relocation Programs. It's amazing compassion, isn't it? Can you hear the sarcasm? I'm an intelligence officer. I've been around the world. I've seen what happens in these things. You would not believe what you will find in these programs. The dehumanizing, lack of dignity, and lack of respect that happens in these programs. And yet we're faced every day with thousands of people moving into the state with no one knowing where they came from. And they are victims, many of them. But nobody's confronting the perpetrators. And then we have moms and dads living in our state that have no clue how they're going to feed their children tomorrow. And Mark Dayton wants a $1.5 billion bonding for the University of Minnesota. Have we lost our minds? It's time to stand up and start taking hold of this thing and get it straight.
So the initial forecast showed a budget deficit, but I think generally we all agree that it will be the February budget when it comes out that will be a true indication. Right now there's things happening on whether money is going to come back to Minnesota through the Children CHIP program and through Minnesota Care, given some of the work that the legislature did last session. With respect to, I think the second part of the question was our cost drivers, our main cost drivers, and as you all know, it's health and human services and education. They take up the largest part of the budget, and those are areas that we will be challenged in, but we can overcome them. We will look at redesign of our healthcare system, and I think we have 4 principles that will help us do that. Making sure that individuals continue to have the choice of their doctor or medical provider, and making sure that our finance and delivery system assures that continuation. We've got to continue to have competition in the healthcare market, and our public policy has to promote good innovation while keeping costs down. So we have to address that in healthcare. The second one is education. We've got to have some education reforms. We have to broaden the ability to have choice for parents within education, whether it's homeschooling, expanding our charter school system, supporting VOTAC in our high schools, and et cetera. I also think we need to work on changing the regulations and giving more local control to our school districts. So we have a lot of work to do in the education area. Thank you.
Well, I think when we look at our budget, it has to have 2 things. It has to be fair, and it has to be honest. And right now, people are paying more and more, and they're getting less and less. And they see other people paying less and less, and they're getting more and more. And it's not fair. And nowhere do you see that more than healthcare. People spending $2,000–3,000 a month just to pay for their premiums, not even counting their co-pays and deductibles. They got little kids. There's no money for a vacation. There's no money to put away for college. They're just trying to borrow money, put it on the card, hope that they can pay their premium, and hope to God nothing goes wrong and no one gets sick. That's not fair. When we see people who from other states can say, I intend to live in the state of Minnesota, lie about what they make, knock on the front door of the Mayo Clinic and get an appointment with no premium, deductible, copay, or appointment. That's not fair, and that's got to change. And also, when you're looking at the waste, fraud, and abuse within those programs, we need to find out exactly where that's coming from. Secondly, you got to be honest with people. Number 1, it's not a surplus, it's an overcollection. Okay? That money does not belong to the government. It's not what are we going to do with the surplus this year with the Star Tribune or the Pioneer Press. That is the people's money that you took too much of. If we had looked at it that way over time, we wouldn't find ourselves in these problems of great deficits when the economy gets a little cold. So, honesty and fairness.
So there's a lot of talk about the forecast, and maybe that matters a little, but I don't care very much about the forecast because we have to cut spending. Even if there's a surplus, we have to cut spending in Minnesota. We have seen a 57% increase in state spending in 8 years. That's crazy. And most Minnesotans, when you talk to them about that, recognize that it's crazy and absolutely not sustainable. So where do you start? Where is the greatest cost driver? It's our Health and Human Services area. There was a study, I think it was the Center of the American Experiment a few years ago, that took similar states to Minnesota in size and demography and said, how do we compare in each area of spending? And Minnesota was kind of in the middle of the pack in almost every area, except for public safety, where we were at the very bottom for multiple reasons, and Health and Human Services, where we weren't just at the top, but where we were so far out of whack with every other similar state that it wasn't even a comparison. That's where we have to start, and we do that by auditing every single program. I've been talking about this for years. It will take us years to do it, but we need to audit every program in state government, starting with Health and Human Services, not to decide whether there's cheating or fraud going on, but to determine whether they're actually working, whether they're actually changing people's lives the way we say we want them to. And if they are, we should celebrate them because it will help make people self-sufficient. And if they're not, we need to stop funding them, period. I think that's the way you have to explain it to the people of Minnesota, as opposed to just some across-the-board cut that scares them to death.
Thank you, everyone. That concludes our responses to question number 2. Question number 3. Minnesota continues to see increased funding in education while test scores are dropping. How would your administration increase return on investment in our educational systems? We'll start with Mr. Parrish on this question.
Yeah, our education system, pre-K to post-secondary, is upside down and backwards. I use the analogy often when I'm lecturing or around the campaign. If we had a business and the 5 of us would be on the factory floor doing all the work while the rest of you were all sitting in an office shuffling papers and essentially the bureaucracy of the company, we wouldn't last long, would we? So why are we tolerating that in education? Why do we have so many adults that never see a student? Why do we have billions of dollars worth of billions of dollars worth of buildings that never see a child, never have set a child foot in it? So my advice is, Department of Education, pack your bags. You're going to find yourself inside a school district with children, inside a building with children in it. You're going to make sure that any unessential staff are going to lose their job. You just get prepared for it. And those that are essential are going to be making sure that they take care of children, not buildings, not projects, not federal programs. The will of the people in that district, the school board, and the local control.
I'll just elaborate a little on my other answer, since that is the second cost driver in the state budget. But again, I think that parents are the closest to their kids and make the decisions for their kids, and that's what they should do. And so as parents, we should have choices on where our children go to school. I think teachers are the next big influence on our children. And so I think we need a pipeline of teachers and a system that allows the teachers that are good to stay there, and those that aren't, don't stay there. I think that we need to look at our teacher licensing in Minnesota, and there have been some few changes in the legislature, but we have a lot of work to do in that area to make sure that we attract and keep the best teachers for our students in the state of Minnesota. Again, the regulations and the formula for student funding is outdated, it's old, it's not allowing our school districts local control, and it's not allowing them flexibility to make decisions in their own districts. Technology. I'm all for innovation, but we can't have technology in schools just for technology's sake. And then finally, I just think that we need to be more creative in our regulatory framework in terms of eliminating the regulations that really have put a stranglehold on our local school districts. And finally, I believe in the protection of First Amendment for our parents and our children in the schools. Thank you.
You know, I talked to a friend of mine, and we had kids the same ages, roughly, and he said, you know, I talk to younger parents, and they tell me they even do more homework with their kids than we did with our kids. He said, man, I don't know how to do pre-calculus. Why am I supposed to be teaching my kid pre-calculus at night? Aren't they supposed to be teaching them that during the day? Do you believe how much homework we have with these kids? And he said, yeah, you know, it's weird. It's like we're teaching them what they're supposed to teach them during the day at night, and they're teaching them during the day what we're supposed to teach them at. It's like we got it backwards here. They're teaching them values during the day, and we're teaching them pre-calculus at night. And we got to change jobs again here. And I think if you haven't read Thinking Minnesota from the Center for the American Experiment and seeing what's going on in the Edina School District, do yourself a favor and pick it up, go online and read it. It will blow your mind about what's going on today. If you look at what's going on in the classroom, our teachers close the door and we have to open that door and find out what's going on, because we have to reclaim the role of parents, which is to teach values and culture. During the day, hey, would it be so wrong if the kids learn some civics? If they learn that when something goes bad in the world, a U.S. ship pulls in with an American flag and food rolls off of it, and we're a force of good around the world, would that really be so bad if our kids learn that during the day, if they learn some civics? I don't think so.
And so I have a really simple and unwavering principle when it comes to every K-12 education decision. Every decision has to be based on what's good for the kids in the system rather than the adults in the system. And that's not an indictment of teachers. We have amazing teachers in this state, but it is an indictment of the teachers union. And I'm sorry, but if we want to change our schools, we have to be willing to go to war with the teachers union. If we're unwilling to upset the apple cart and maybe be a little bit of a bull in the education establishment's china shop, we're not going to change anything. The teachers union in this state is more powerful than they are in practically any state in the country. And if we're not willing to take them on, we're not going to change anything. Now, having said that, Mary mentioned the importance of teachers, and I couldn't agree with that more. And the problem is, through the state legislature and the union, we have tied the hands of principals in every public school in this state. They ought to be able to reward and promote the best teachers, and they ought to be able to fire the poor ones, because we've got both, just like in every other profession. I would throw on top of that simple principle that we need to start rolling back mandates so that locally elected school boards have more control over decisions on spending and curriculum, and we have to give parents more control and more choice. I believe in real choice for parents throughout this state. That's a big lift, but we can get there.
Well, my dad was a public school teacher, and I joke, but it's not really a joke. I was raised by about 20 teachers and their families. That's the community that I grew up in. And when I got down to the legislature, in my 4 years there, was on all 4 of the education committees in the House. And in those 4 years, the needle barely moved. And what I realized, what I learned while I was down there, that you go into the urban core, into Minneapolis and St. Paul, and 50% of the kids aren't graduating. I want you to think about that. The freshmen who entered Minneapolis public schools in September, 50% of them aren't going to graduate. And if you're a minority, it might be close to 75% of them. And the needle hasn't moved at the legislature. And we have talked about it for years and fought battles for years. Governor Palenti and our education committee chairs, they're doing a fantastic job fighting as hard as they can, but the needle hasn't moved. And the only solution is to disintermediate that education union bureaucratic complex with parent choice. And so the option that I have proposed, the proposal that I have made, is that if you're the parent of a child in one of those failing schools, you should be able to get a voucher to send your kid to the school of your choice. Private, parochial, charter, public, whatever it is. Send them to a school where they will succeed. And you know what? Those parents have never had anybody trust them and believe in them enough to say, you're going to make a great decision for your kids. I trust you. I believe in you. And if we give you a voucher, you're going to make a great decision for your kids. We do that. It's great policy. It fixes education, and we can win.
Thank you, candidates. The next question. What steps would you take to improve the business climate in Minnesota and to entice employers to move here? And the question will go to Mary Giuliani.
Thank you. I think what we have to do to improve the business climate and entice new companies to come here is make sure that we get out of our stagnant economy right now. And the only way to do that is to have tax reform. And it's necessary because Minnesota is in the top highest tax bracket in almost all of our taxes. My goal is to get Minnesota out of the top 10 in all of our tax categories. Our income tax, our corporate tax will never be the lowest, but we can get out of that top 10. When Governor Dayton put that added fourth tier on and then made the lowest tier even more expensive to solve problems that didn't get solved. I'll do what I did as mayor. You establish a culture of a place where businesses know they are welcome. You want our businesses that are here in Minnesota to grow and expand. You want them to create the jobs. You want to operate in a free market, which is what we do in Woodbury. We don't license our businesses. We believe in a free market. We don't pick winners and losers. Of course you want to attract new businesses to your state. To do that, you have to have the climate to bring new businesses. They're not going to want to come establish a business in a state that has the taxes as high as we have. And I will tell you, I go out every day and meet with CEOs and business owners of medium-sized small businesses. Our entrepreneurs are not getting started, and our regulation is costing our businesses way too much money.
All of the wealth in the state of Minnesota today comes from the same place it came from 100 years ago. It comes from harvesting stuff, making stuff, and healing people. Harvesting agriculture, timber, and minerals. Harvesting, if you just look at the first of those, let's look at mining, northern Minnesota. Northern Minnesota, what is the Democrats, what's their option? Their option is say we need to transition away from dirty mining and towards a service economy based around recreation. What that means for a family is that you might have a $72,000 a year job with benefits working for Twin Metals, and you're going to lose that job and you're going to replace it working as a barista or a fat tire bike rental shop or a yarn store. Try to raise kids on 19 grand a year with no benefits. That's what they're asking northern Minnesota to do right now. And that's what the Democrats are saying that your job is. Let's look at agriculture. Try to run a farm in Minnesota. Do you really think that the state of Minnesota, that they believe that the Democrats are on their side? Or are they called wrongdoers and polluters? Because that's what it says in Governor Dayton's veto messages every single time we try to help people who grow stuff in this state. And what about healing people? Our healthcare system, if you want to talk about regulation, try to do that in the healthcare area. We're regulating them out of the state.
So how do we attract more businesses? Stop being hostile to businesses and to entrepreneurs. This is not rocket science. We tax too much, we regulate too much, and we move at the speed of government rather than the speed of business when it comes to permitting and licensing. I have 60 seconds left, and I could talk about all of them, but I will just focus on the taxes for the rest of my question, because we, as Mary mentioned, are in the top of almost every category when it comes to taxation. But the one that really stands out to me is the income tax, which is also for most small businesses, their business tax. Our highest income tax rate is 85% higher than the national average, which is a problem because it chases out investment and wealth. But the bigger problem is our bottom income tax rate, which applies to any person or business that makes more than $10,350 a year. So almost everybody. Our bottom income tax rate in Minnesota is higher than the highest rate in 22 other states. Think about that. The people and the small businesses that are least able to pay by definition are paying a higher rate than the filthiest rich people in nearly half the country. We are not just taxing to death the CEO in Minnesota. We are taxing to death the school teacher and the bartender and the mechanic and every struggling small business person in Minnesota. We solve this problem by stop being so hostile to entrepreneurs and businesses.
Well, we just had a momentous tax bill passed in Washington, D.C., and I think we're going to see the United States economy take off, and Minnesota is going to stand out even more like a sore thumb in terms of our business climate. And so we all talk about it, right? Republicans have been talking about it for years and years and years, and here at the state, the same thing, and again, nothing ever happens. And part of it is, if you want to cut taxes in state government, you got to cut spending. They're two sides of the same coin. You have to balance your budget in state government. And so if you want to cut taxes and improve the business climate, You need to have the will and the plan to actually cut state spending, and I do, a 15% cut in state spending, and the proposals are all out there for how we get there. And if we do that, we can get rid, in Minnesota, that's a $7 billion biennial opportunity, we can get rid of the estate tax, the corporate income tax, the statewide business property tax. We can do dramatic rate relief at the top end, especially for pass-through entities that record their income on their personal taxes. We can get rid of the 2013 $2 billion tax increase that the Democrats passed, and we'll still have money left over for an infrastructure program that I've proposed. So if you got the will to go in and take on state government and actually cut it, we can reinvigorate our economy. We've got a plan to do that. We can send a really, really strong signal by putting forward a candidate who's strong enough on these issues to take on the entrenched special interests, cut state government, and actually provide real tax relief for Minnesotans.
Deregulate, 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 and end the insatiable the tax schemes in Minnesota. It's out of control. We're the top 5 taxation states in the United States. Top 5. We're pushing people out on purpose. Again, I said it a bit earlier, you could make a case that we're pushing our senior citizens and retirees out of the state on purpose. Why? Has anybody asked why? Why do such a ridiculous thing? Donald Trump has the blueprint to all this. So let's get on board with Donald Trump. Let's get on board with our president. Let's get on board with supporting him and getting involved. He's got the blueprint. Follow it. Stop fighting him. The thing is, we have a situation where we are fighting back and forth with a voting bloc that we're trying to appease. And somebody's going to have to stand up and be strong enough, have enough courage to say, we're going to stop this fight with trying to appease voting blocs, trying to appease individual groups of people. I'll give you a voting bloc. It's a Minnesota citizen who's paying the taxes. That's the voting bloc. That's who we're going to go after as Republicans. That's who we're going to go after as Governor Parrish. Is supporting the citizens and making sure their taxation schemes are done so they can reinvest in Minnesota.
Moving on to the next question. MNsure has been a total disaster. Premiums have skyrocketed, patient choice has been virtually eliminated, and providers are leaving the Minnesota market. What steps would your administration take to come up with a system that controls cost and restores patient choice? We'll start with Mr. Dean.
I first introduced the bill to get rid of MNsure, and I had a lot of people that didn't think it was such a great idea to get rid of it. And some of them were Republicans. And I had to introduce that bill and push it along very hard in order to get it to the floor for a vote. But I had a lot of people behind me, and I had a lot of people who were supporting me who understood that this technical boondoggle, this IT grab, this acorn for healthcare was bad, it hurt people, and we needed to get rid of it. Oregon was smart enough to figure it out. They jumped out first. Then Hawaii, then other states. We were the only state that kept digging the hole deeper. And it's a problem. Now, what I've done is I've proposed a solution that actually says we're going to do a Minnesota solution and do healthcare the Minnesota way. Donald Trump has said, Minnesota, if you can do it your way. And we're going to say, President Trump, thank you. We don't know if we need your permission or your forgiveness, but we're going to do it our way. And we're going to do it all in Minnesota. And that's the plan that I have put forward, realizing that we do have to take care of people who need a lot of help. The disabled, the elderly, the people who are profoundly disabled to the point where they can't work and they can't go out and shop for health care. We're going to take care of them, and we're going to do a good job, but we need to replace the IT system. We need to get rid of MNsure, kill it, and bury it once and for all and start over.
So I appreciate the question about MNsure, but we have to understand that most Minnesotans, we can kill MNsure, and I think we should. but that's not going to give them much solace because they're scared to death about where their health insurance is coming from and how expensive it's getting, whether they're on MNsure or not. So I don't think that can be our only policy, and it also can't be, here's what we're going to do that's creative with the people who are on government insurance, who are either heavily or completely subsidized, because most Minnesotans aren't in that boat, and they're scared about what's happening. So we need to actually present a plan about health insurance and health insurance costs that appeals to everybody, not just these small segments of the population. And it's a couple things. Number one, it's about competition, which creates more choice and more value for people. I am not convinced, for example, that the federal government is ever going to figure out how to allow people to buy insurance across state lines, despite the fact that I think it's a good idea. So we can do it regionally. I can lead as governor an interstate compact with the governors of Wisconsin and the Dakotas and Iowa and say, let's get together and at least allow our citizens more choices, which will make a big difference, particularly in rural Minnesota, where a lot of folks don't have any choice at all on the MNsure exchange. And then the other piece is more options for individuals, and we do that by starting to eliminate some of the mandates. We have the largest number of mandates, or close to it, in the country. Government shouldn't be telling someone what their health insurance has to look like.
Well, rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic of Obamacare and federal and state-controlled health insurance is not the solution in reality and in this election. And so I think we need a much bolder proposal. It isn't the MNsure website and the MNsure customer service office and who's doing which function. It's the fact that MNsure and Obamacare have coerced and distorted every part of the healthcare market. So my proposal is not just get rid of MNsure, get rid of the penalties, get rid of the mandates, get rid of all the goofy actuarial stuff that they impose on health insurers, and you can dramatically reinvigorate the individual market. And my proposal, it's called Healthy Minnesota, based on a pilot that Representative Steve Gottwalt actually offered, and we supported in the House 6 years ago, that takes people off of the nearly 1 million people who are on state-offered insurance. Think about that, over 900,000 people getting their insurance through the state, and offers them an income-adjusted voucher so they can go out into that reinvigorated market and they can buy the insurance that they need, priced for them with the coverage that they want and the benefits that their family needs. Individual people making choices in the market. And here's why that's so important politically. You know what the Democrats are going to offer in this campaign, every single one of them? 3 words: Medicare for all. It's going to sound super attractive. It'll bankrupt our delivery system. It's snake oil, but it's going to be very attractive. My alternative gives me the chance to go out there and say, who do you want running your health care? The government or you? And I think that's an argument we can win.
We must get back to privatizing our healthcare system. The healthcare system in this state is essentially government employees. Mayo Clinic itself is subsidized to the tune of ungodly amounts of money that if they didn't have, they would be bankrupt. There's no medical industry in this state actually producing wealth anymore. They have no ability to produce wealth and sustain themselves. How is that sustainable? When is somebody going to stand up and start telling the truth that we're bleeding to death? We got to commit triage. We've got to practice triage, not just fix the program. We've got to do triage right now. We have people crossing the borders in the state of Minnesota, in the 5-state area, that are never tracked and never sent a bill. We have an immigration and refugee and illegals and sanctuary cities policies that are bleeding us to death that might seem like compassion. But how's that compassionate to the mom and dad that can't take their child to the doctor because they can't pay the monthly bill on the insurance policy? We can come up with all the fixes in the world, but when is somebody going to stand up and be brave enough to say, we're going to stop the waste, fraud, and abuse? There's no compassion in it. It's a lack of compassion. We have no decency or respect for our own citizens anymore. Enough is enough. And then we'll get back to privatizing our insurance programs to make sure they compete with each other and generate their own wealth and make sure they are self-sustainable themselves.
Well, MNsure is not a healthcare delivery system, as I think we've all agreed up here. It's an IT system and not operating very well. So stay or not stay, the issue is the delivery of the healthcare services. I do think that we have opportunities under the Trump administration to apply for those waivers. The 1115 waivers that deal with Medicaid, the 1225 waivers that deal with the commercial area, and to bring flexibility back as we redesign our healthcare system here. I gave you my 4 overriding principles that will guide me in redesigning healthcare, and I'm excited to say we're putting together an amazing team of healthcare policy advisors. I don't know when we're going to announce it, but let me give you an example. I said we have to continue to support that relationship between the healthcare provider and the patient, and our finance and our delivery systems have to support that. Well, we have an aging population with chronic illnesses. And think about if that relationship existed, that care could be given whether the person was at home, whether the person was in a clinic, whether the person was in transition care, whether the person was in a hospital. If that care can continue, you can use the same doctor, the same set of healthcare providers. You can use technology to make sure that that continuum of care remains no matter where the patient is receiving care. That's the kind of system we need to design in healthcare moving forward.
Thank you, candidates. Our next question will go to Jeff Johnson. Transportation funding has been a hot topic recently. If elected governor, what would your position be on funding transportation, and what are your transportation priorities?
Well, priorities are the key word. I've got 2 teenage sons, and I remember when they were 12 and 13 years old and they would come home from school, and I'd tell them they had to do their homework. They'd say, well, can I have the TV on while I'm doing it? No, you need to focus. Well, can I put my earphones in and listen to music because that will help? No, you need to focus. That's the biggest problem in government right now. We can't focus on what's most important, and we don't prioritize. So, sorry, I went off on a little tangent there, but with respect to transportation, we have to focus and prioritize what everyone in this state relies upon, which are roads and bridges. That doesn't mean we don't need transit. We do in population centers throughout this state. We need transit, but when I talk about prioritizing transit, it's going to be the one form of transit that actually makes fiscal sense, which is buses. I've always been a believer in a beefed up, strong bus system. I've got a video out there on Southwest Light Rail, because I have a lot of Republicans who say, why are we so opposed to light rail? We don't get it. So I put a video out, watch it, it's on our website and on Facebook, that explains that Southwest Light Rail and frankly every other light rail line, the cost benefit of it is horrible because it costs so much money going forward and it doesn't do anything to relieve congestion. So my priorities are going to be on roads and bridges. The secondary area will be on transit, and that will be a beefed up bus system.
So it's amazing to me, when I left the state legislature, it's about 5 years ago, and the state budget was just under $35 billion, and now it's $46 billion. That's an $11 billion increase in 5 years, 35%. And the legislators are jumping up and down, telling us that we don't have any money for roads and bridges. How is that even possible? 35% increase, and we aren't even funding the basic priorities of government. And the solution, frankly, goes back to making the tough decisions and actually having the will to cut state spending in the areas that it needs to be cut so that we can actually prioritize the stuff that we need. And I talked about a 15% budget reduction giving us a huge opportunity to offer tax relief and really incentivize our private sector economy and keep the government from crowding it out. And at the end, I mentioned that I had an infrastructure program that could be funded with that as well. And so the priority of my infrastructure program, and we'll talk about it a little more broadly than transportation, is roads, bridges, water, wastewater, and broadband. And so we will, if I'm governor, find those cost savings, and we will fund a very specific list of projects with revenue, not bonding and borrowing, that will cover roads and bridges, water, wastewater, and a broadband strategy across the state. And I'm not saying that the state of Minnesota needs to get into the broadband business, but it is a new infrastructure that we have to be competitive on, and finding a way to do that through the private sector will be part of my initiative as well.
Over and over and over again, we've witnessed, decades we've witnessed, and some of you are elected officials, and you know that this is what I'm going to say is to be true. We have a habit of getting invested in and interested in specific groups of people who are picking winners and losers And over and over and over again, you can make a case throughout Minnesota with regards to roads, bridges, any kind of infrastructure decisions. They're connected to some possible really illicit little activities behind closed doors. And I say illicit on purpose. You're the taxpayers. You are due full disclosure of why a road is built, where and when. You're due full disclosure as to what every single bridge has a purpose and meaning for. I would suggest to you, I'm not an engineer, but I would suggest to you, you can look at Google Earth and figure out that there's some really screwed up decisions that are made that cost billions of dollars that never should have happened in the first place. There's basic decency and respect for the citizen is not happening, and those deals that are being made are costing you billions of dollars, and it needs to end. We do need a revitalized infrastructure. I've been to third world countries that have better communications infrastructure than Minnesota. It's really sad, all the money that we spend, and we get what? So we need to start asking some serious questions about how they do business at the Capitol.
Transportation priorities under a Stevens administration would be roads, bridges, airports, and waterways. And even under that priority, there's never enough money to build what we want, so there'll be priorities established under that. I believe that we have had a misplaced emphasis on light rail. Light rail is expensive. We're building permanent structure over infrastructure that is deteriorating and needs to be replaced. That doesn't make much sense. We are looking at challenges of tomorrow and applying yesterday's solutions. I think that funding has to go into buses and bus routes and bus lanes that make sense, that add roads and bridges perhaps under the transit funding, that allow for flexibility to allow emergency vehicles to go in there, that look to the future for the technology that might be coming for driverless cars or the things that we can't even see today that can be used in those. So I say we've had a misplaced emphasis on light rail. We've got to get back to our priorities, and that will be my direction to the Minnesota Department of Transportation under Stevens administration. Thank you.
There's a cost to road construction and to work that a lot of people don't think about. Have you ever been driving down the road and you see a traffic jam coming up, you see the tail lights, brake lights coming up, and then you're into the jam. 15 minutes, 20 minutes go by, you think, is there an accident? What's going on? Then you see a cone, then you see another cone, then you move over, more cones, 25 minutes go by, no more cones, no more traffic. You're back up to 55 miles an hour and you think, what the heck did I just do that for? That's a half hour of my life I'm never going to get back. Have you ever gone through a construction project and see the little guy sitting over there with his legs crossed, painting the side of the road, maybe some decorations, or causing a traffic jam in both directions, thinking, how much time is this costing everybody? Have you ever thought about how much time everybody's involved in that traffic jam? We don't think about it in Minnesota, but other states do, like Wisconsin. They say we're going to prioritize people's time and we're going to spend more money on temporary accommodation. That means we're going to make roads next to the roads while we're working on roads to get people home on time, and we're going to time that and we're going to say that's a cost. We're going to say if you're working on this project and you're a day late, we're going to charge you extra money. If you get done a day early, we're going to give you more money because we value people's time. Our job is to get people from where they are to where they want to go in as little time as possible. Does that seem so hard?
Thank you, candidates. Immigration is a complex issue. How do we honor our welcoming American heritage while protecting our citizens? Please address any policy perspective you might have on sanctuary cities in your response. Mr. Downey.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I authored a safety and security proposal back in November, and going all the way back to 2015 after the Paris nightclub attacks, I actually called for a halt to the refugee resettlement of Syrians, in which we were quite concerned about ISIS terrorists infiltrating. The three prongs of my safety and security plan are: number one, we need to get rid of sanctuary cities, and if you can't do it legally or in the courts, we'll do it budgetarily and withhold the funding. That is a big problem, and it costs us a lot here in this state, and there's some other components on that. With regard to refugee resettlement, people in Minnesota have no idea what's happening in this state. There is zero transparency. I've called for a pause in our refugee resettlement program so that we can assess the costs, where the people are coming from, whether the vetting is adequate, the numbers, where they're being relocated and why, and allow community input, the community's voice. Believe it or not, the federal statute requires that the community's voice be heard in the refugee resettlement decisions that are being made, and it's not right now. It's all behind the curtain with Barack Obama and Mark Dayton. To be clear, the Trump administration has made tremendous progress. I believe we will have under 1,000 or around 1,000 refugees resettled in Minnesota. The vetting has gotten much tighter. My own opinion is, unlike Tennessee that is suing the Trump administration to exit the refugee resettlement program, I personally don't want to spend the first 2 or 3 years of my administration in court fighting the Trump administration. I say we work with them, we put the community input that we need, we put the pause on, we get it defined, everybody knows what's going on, and we can make a good decision going forward from there.
We're going to end our participation in the immigration and refugee relocation programs. We're going to end it. Not because we're never going to have a refugee or an immigrant again, because we're going to step back and do it the way it was intended to be done, and that's for individual sponsorship. We are no longer going to be a state that's exploited to the tune of billions of dollars that are actually funding. I'm an intelligence officer. I'm telling you, as God is my witness, you've been funding terrorists. You Minnesota taxpayers, you've been funding and educating terrorists that travel at will out of Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. It's got to end, and it's got to end now. There's no compassion in it. People are dying. We're going to also back up law enforcement to make sure that they can do their job without any fear of prosecution, of asking someone whether they're here legally or not, and they are backed up when they do that and not confronted about being insensitive. It's just simply a ridiculous situation we're in. We are not going to tolerate alternative or altered legal systems within our legal systems. No more. Setting up alternative legal systems within communities and small groups, that's called a no-go zone. Whether you want to call it that or not, that's called a no-go zone, and it's not going to be tolerated anymore, not in my administration.
I think the question was on sanctuary cities, so I'll address that first. But our country was founded on freedom and rule of law. And I think we need to honor the rule of law, whether it's sanctuary cities or any other law. I think if we're free to choose as communities what we're gonna enforce and what we're gonna honor and what we don't, we'll have chaos. I believe in the rule of law. Now, people have a right to fight for policy change that they want to see. And we live in a free country, and I don't agree with it, but I welcome the people to fight for policy changes that they might want to see. With respect to the refugee resettlement, we've always been open in Minnesota to refugees. But I think we can't turn a blind eye to the impacts that happen in the refugee resettlement. And I think communities should be able to determine the impacts and make decisions. I say it simply like this. I have a family, I have 2 children, and I'm asked to bring in a 3rd child. And I say, yeah, I can do that. I can support that child. I can provide, and I choose to do that. Then somebody says, well, I want you to take 8 more children. You know what? I have an obligation to say, oh, those 8 children are preschoolers. So they're not going to contribute, but they're sure going to require a lot of resources. And you know, I've got 3 children now. And I'm not going to be able to provide for them if I bring them in. I do not want to be told that I have to take 8 more children in. I want to be able to look at that value, make the decision for myself, and I believe our communities need to do that.
Minnesota's always been open and welcoming to new people who want a fresh start, who are willing to work hard and play by the rules. And you know, as I've been traveling around the state, I've traveled to all 87 counties between Labor Day and December 1st. And I learned a lot, and I've heard a lot about refugee resettlement around the different parts of the state where we see that. And some things have really surprised me. Number one, that per capita, Minnesota has more refugees than any other state, and significantly so. Not only do we accept the most number of refugees, but the most refugees cross state lines and they come to Minnesota. So you have to say, well, what is it about that? And you think when you're if you're sponsoring somebody, that generally means I'm going to pay so that they can come here and I can acclimate them, take care of them, get their feet under them so that they can get on their way. But actually the sponsors receive money, they don't pay it. But who does? The counties, which are really stressed under this, whether they are for child care, for housing, for health care, for translator services, for education, for ESL. There's so many county-supplied services that we can't keep up with. Steve Drazkowski has a bill that says let's at least figure out what the costs are by county and audit it. That should have an up and down vote. It has been prevented from having an up and down vote in any committee and on the House floor. I'm a co-author of the Drazkowski audit bill. That's where we need to start. And I think that that's something that almost every Minnesotan should be able to get behind.
So I have written op-eds that have been published statewide on both the refugee resettlement issue and sanctuary cities. And on sanctuary cities, essentially the argument was we need to stop them. And we can do that through funding. I mean, if you take away LGA from cities that are sanctuary cities, they're not going to be sanctuary cities anymore. It's pretty simple. And my argument, it was actually in response to an article in, I think, the Star Tribune, in which they suggested that a suburb that wanted to become a sanctuary suburb was trying to be, quote, pro-immigrant. And my argument is they're not trying to be pro-immigrant, they're trying to be pro-illegal immigrant, which is anti-immigrant, because every DFL policy is anti-immigrant. They've created a failing school system where many of these immigrants live. They make it impossible for them to start a small business, even buy a cab to drive around. And so making this argument that they're somehow pro-immigrant is just false. And then I wrote one, I think that was in the Pioneer Press a few weeks ago, saying we need to pause or stop refugee resettlement until local communities get the information that they're asking for and can make that decision themselves. And I think that, by the way, is one of the things that sets me apart, not the position that I'm taking, because we all take essentially at least a similar position, but the fact that I'm just not saying it to Republican groups, I'm putting it out there to the general public. We have to educate the general public on our issues. We can't just talk to ourselves about these things. That's the only way we're going to get this done.
Candidates? The next question. There is a growing labor shortage in Minnesota in the trades industry, healthcare services industry, and other sectors of our economy. Employers are citing difficulty in recruiting, training, and keeping talent. As governor, what steps would you take to ensure that Minnesota remains competitive?
It's a really interesting statistic because Minnesota is populated with education system throughout the state. It's astounding how many school programs we have, post-secondary and technical programs. But yet we always have this data point of, well, we can't find trained people. So somebody has to start asking the question, if we can't find any trained people in one of the most heavily populated education systems in the country, pretty good question. So when's somebody going to stand up and say enough is enough? You're full of garbage. You're not telling the truth. And I'm not talking about the people trying to find employees. I'm talking about the education system. So when are they going to get the focus back to where people are really what's needed, and not this agenda of who knows what their agenda is? I have no idea what their agenda is. I work at Fullcraft, Kenyon, Minnesota right now. I'm a team lead on the floor, on the factory floor. You've got really good people out there working their tails off 10, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. They're trained pretty good. But yet we hear this narrative over and over and over again. I'm suggesting to you the narrative is a little bit off track on purpose for a specific agenda. What is that agenda? Not quite sure, but I guarantee you there's employers out there that want employees that are really looking for jobs, and we can get them back there.
I'd say the workforce shortage is real in Minnesota. As I talk to employers within the community of Woodbury, I hear it. I was down in Rochester just a few days ago, and I stopped in and met with 2 businesses, and that was their top concern, was the workforce shortage. I think some of the things that can be done, and actually I'm optimistic because they're being done in some areas in Brainerd, in pockets of the state, in partnering where the high schools, our VOTEC schools, and our two-year schools are partnering to train young people for those professions, and they'll be high-paying jobs. So I think what we need to do in order to support that is our schools need to bring back that VOTEC training in high schools, maybe even in junior high. And I think parents get to have the choice, and school counselors on career choices. You know, when my children went to school, you look and you say, well, what are your gifts and what are your passions, and whether they line up, that's what you should do. And my dad always said, do what you love and the money will follow. So you can go to a 4-year college and you're going to start on that entry-level job and you can work your way up. You go to a VOTEC training school and start on an entry-level job and work your way up. So the key is to allow opportunities for our children to do the things that they're good at, that they want to do, and that we can support in the education system. I know that Congressman Emmer is working on that with the partnerships out in Washington, D.C., and would love to continue to work on that as we look at that workforce development issue here in Minnesota. Thank you.
As I've traveled around the state, I always ask employers, what's your number one issue? And it's generally either healthcare and workforce or workforce and healthcare, trying to get people. And they're in fierce competition with each other. They say, if I could hire 5 people tomorrow at $17 an hour, I'd hire them tomorrow with healthcare, if I could get them to show up and not lose them to my competition. Particularly in greater Minnesota, there's even more intense competition. There's less loyalty to employers than there used to be because there's more opportunities to move from one job to another. But the biggest thing that I can think of that we could do immediately is when you look at the restrictions around Obamacare, it's 30 hours. My kid can't get, you can get 29 hours, you can't get to 30 because then that triggers health care. So we got the number of employees you get. I'd love to add employees, but I can't because then I'm going to be triggered for another Obamacare trigger. So I'm going to buy some machinery or do something else or keep the money myself instead of adding on. So we've had a false cap over our economy based on these restrictions for Obamacare that are really stifling our economy. Now, the other thing that we really can and should do is try to incentivize people to get to where these jobs are in training and in vocational training in particular. But I don't think we need to overthink it. There's a gentleman in my district who employs people out of Century College, and he hires them. He loves to hire Century College grads. And I said, what about the skills gap? What about math? And he said, you know what, Matt? I need a kid, any kid in Minnesota, who can show up on time, work an alarm clock. I'll teach them everything else they need to know. We need those values taught at home as well.
So I agree that the workforce issue is real, and it's a huge problem, at least in parts of the state. And I think it's based on 2 things. One of them is this training skills issue, which I'll talk about in a second. But there is another problem, and I hear this all the time. There are Minnesotans who just don't want to work because we have created a welfare system that makes it better to not work. I hear this over and over again from employers. We need to remove every disincentive in our system from working, and we have to have a work requirement for able-bodied people. And that's not as a punishment. That's not to say, well, I have to work, so he has to work. It's because work is intrinsically good. It is our way of showing that we were created in God's image by using our skills and talents and passions to help other people. So that is part of it. The other part, which is also real, is a skills gap. And I think you can argue that there's maybe a training deficit there. But I think the bigger problem is a mindset we have in this state that any kid who doesn't go to a 4-year college is somehow a failure or not successful. I've got a kid in college, and now I have a junior who's starting to think about what he wants to do next. And I can guarantee you, if he decides to go a different route, whether it's military services or a VOTEC or an apprenticeship program, there's going to be people in my community who will kind of feel sorry for us as parents, which is pathetic. We should be so proud of these kids who pick what is best for them rather than what the society tells them they're supposed to do. And a governor can use the bully pulpit to make sure we change that attitude. I think that's really important.
So I think we've largely talked about the symptoms here in this question so far. You look at the fundamentals in Minnesota, and the trend lines are actually pretty disturbing. We are actually a net exporter of businesses in this state. We are a net exporter of capital and personal wealth. We've actually, for 14 of the last 15 years, been a net exporter of people. More people move out of Minnesota to another state than move from another state back to Minnesota, and our population growth has come largely from international immigration. And there's a really disturbing trend in our workforce and in our employment. Our median income growth is well below the national average right now. Our GDP growth is well below the national average. And we actually, in Minnesota, since 2000, have created almost 50% of our jobs in education, social services, healthcare, and government sectors. We have half of our job growth coming from government-funded sectors. It can't last. It doesn't add up. State government cannot continue to grow twice as fast as the rest of the economy and think that we're going to have a sustainable set of fundamentals in Minnesota. And so thinking about Minnesota and a strategy to help it succeed, guess what? We got to cut state spending. I've got the proposal to do that. We got to reduce taxes. I've got the proposal to do that. We need to fix the healthcare costs. Proposals to do that. And to fix the gaps in education where we are literally leaving thousands of kids behind. We can do this, but it's not by tackling the symptoms. It's by tackling the big fundamentals with bold proposals.
Thank you, Candace. Please answer the following question with a yes or a no. As governor, would you advocate for the rights of the unborn? This is Giuliani Stevens.
Yes.
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 Yes. If it's a yes, no question.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
We have one last question here, and we're going to try and soften it a little bit because I think it's a loaded question. If elected governor, would you commit to dissolving the Met Council or redefining the Met Council? And then
We'll start with Mr. Dean.
Mr. Dean.
Well, I think that it needs to be disbanded, and I think that those decisions that are being made at the Met Council level should be made by people who are elected, not by people who are appointed, because they stick their nose into areas of our lives where they don't belong, like telling the city of Lake Elmo where they have to put development. And if they want water down to the end of a street, they have to build an apartment building to do that. Or if they tell the city of St. Paul that we have to find places along the rail lines to put grandma, and all of these different development ideas and social ideas that nobody ever thought they were going to do. Now, their first charter was to do roads, do sewers, and shut up. That was their job. And I don't know where that was or how that started, but how we got here. We need to tie those jobs back to elections so that people can get unelected. And that's where I believe we should go. And I know that the Commissioner Johnson probably has an idea along those lines as well.
Thank you for that segue. That's nice. So I get asked all the time, what's the very first thing you'll do as governor? And my answer is, number one, after I'm sworn in, I'm going to go find a quiet place with Sandy to go say a prayer, asking for some guidance and humility, and then I'm going to fire the Met Council and dismantle that beast once and for all. Not because they're the biggest problem in Minnesota. We got bigger problems. But because they are the perfect example of the biggest problem in Minnesota, which is this belief that there are two classes in our society. The ruling class, who should tell everybody else how to live, and then the rest of us. And I'm living this for the last 9 years on the Hennepin County Board, and I have been fighting this as best I can, but the best I can do, frankly, is throw a monkey wrench every once in a while. As governor, you can actually stop it. We need the legislature's help, but I believe we can get there with some leadership. There has been some criticism up here that, well, you have to be careful. There's some risk because you're going to take a lot of what the Met Council does and push it out into the bureaucracies, and therefore it might actually get worse. And my answer to that is, hell no, we're not going to push this stuff out into the bureaucracies, because half of what the Met Council is doing, state government shouldn't be doing at all. And so we're going to take it away from state government and give it back to locally elected officials where it belongs. So yes, first thing I'll do.
Well, here's where we miss Senator Osmic up at the table, because if this question came along, he'd stand up and he'd hold up a 200-page bill and tell you this is how much legislation is required to get rid of the Met Council. And he's exactly right. It's all over the place down there in state government. And my statement since Senator Osmic left is that if I'm governor and he gets that bill through the legislature, I'll sign it the minute it hits my desk. But having worked in the bureaucracy and knowing how these things work, you can't just decommission a billion-dollar enterprise and say it goes away. There are pieces and components that have to occur. And so when you push, like Senator Osmic does, pieces of this off to the DNR and to Metro Parks and other places, guess what? I've seen it happen. You can decommission something, and yes, it can get worse and become more sinister and more expensive in its component parts. And so when I sign Senator Osmic's bill, not only will we sign it, we'll actually have a plan, an intelligent plan. And guess what? Every governor candidate up here gets to fire the Met Council when they start. That's state law. You reappoint a new Met Council when you become governor. The commissioner of the Met Council and all of my appointees will be tasked with one thing: to help me execute Senator Osmic's bill to get rid of it.
Great segue for me. I'm not going to appoint anybody new for quite a while. And we're going to make sure that the authorities that the legislators have abdicated and given over their powers to people that they should be doing their jobs in the first place are going to do their job, and it won't be pushed on to any other organizations or bureaucracy. I'm not saying legislation has all the power or control over it, but legislators have abdicated their authorities and powers quite a bit in this situation. I might even take it a step farther. Not only will I not appoint anybody new for quite some time, if at all, we're going to investigate a few very unhealthy relationships that have affected you very badly in the last 10 years here in Minnesota with regards to spending your tax dollars.
Well, the Met Council is a creation of the legislature, and they get their authority from the legislature. So as governor, I would work to make sure that the structure and scope as it exists now is gone. They have direct taxing authority. As you've heard, they are not elected, they're appointed officials. I have been pushing back against the Met Council since I have been mayor in 2000, when I got elected in 2010. And in 2014, Met Council came out with a document called Thrive 2040. And I read that document, and I wrote a very, I thought, diplomatic but strong letter back to the Met Council and said, you're supposed to do wastewater, you're supposed to do the parks, and you're involved in some transportation. I just wrote down the chapters that I remember that I responded back to. They got into climate change, housing, affordable housing, transportation, economic development, equity. And I had a response for all of those. It is time to change their authority and their scope, and it will get done under a Stevens administration.
Thank you, candidates. That concludes the questions for this evening. We'll now be going into closing statements, and we will go in reverse order of the opening statements. So we'll start off with Mary Giuliani.
Thank you. In 1914, my grandfather came over from Italy to Ellis Island. He worked in the coal mines in Pennsylvania. Then he opened his own grocery store. He raised 6 kids. He lived the American dream. At age 30, my dad came to Rochester, Minnesota to pursue his American dream. I'm one of 6 children, raised in a Christian, Italian, medical family, and my parents taught me the value of hard work and honesty and the importance of family. Minnesota has afforded me the opportunity to live my American dream. After graduating from the University of Michigan, I came back, went to night law school, worked during the day, became a partner in a law firm. I've been married to my husband Greg for 33 years. We have 2 children and 2 grandchildren. But I ask you, are our children and grandchildren going to be the first generation to have to settle for a smaller dream? As Republicans, we can't accept that. We need a Republican chief executive who can champion a creative, can-do, and common decency culture. And that's why I'm running. So why me? As mayor, I do have executive experience, balancing budgets, proposing the policies, and effectively making government work. We talked about the business climate. In 7 years in Woodbury, we have gone from a place that's considered difficult to do business to a culture of business friendly. Jobs have increased over 17%. 270 new businesses have come to the community, and we have built, and that's just in the last 4 years, and the builders have built over 2,800 new homes in the community. Secondly, after 8 years of Mark Dayton, we need a leader, a strong leader, who can champion a political philosophy that's built on a foundation of strong principles. I tell people, I don't lead a political life. I lead a Minnesota life that happens to involve politics. But as governor, I can assure you, you'll know what I believe in and what I stand for. And third, I believe I'm best not only to win this election, and I talked about that in my opening statement, but really to transform the culture and office of governor. I think the attributes that I bring as a candidate are those that Minnesota's going to demand next year. Boldness, innovation, an understanding of government's role, and most importantly, an understanding of what Minnesotans value. If I'm blessed with your support, I pledge to you that I will work every day to move Minnesota forward with new solutions and bold leadership so that our North Star state can remain a beacon of optimism and unlimited opportunity that we know. Thank you. God bless Minnesota and the United States of America.
I'm a very different candidate. I'm a candidate that many of you may not be used to. I want to provide you as many reassurances and comfort as I possibly can. Those of you that have been in the political process or the political world for decades, some of you. On the other hand, I want to make sure I'm honest and yet dignified with how I approach some of the things that have gone wrong. And we cannot go wrong again. We are at a crossroads here in Minnesota. If we lose this election as Republicans, as Minnesotans, as conservatives, if we lose this election, we are on a road to disaster that no one really wants to talk about. I'm a different candidate. I'm an intelligence officer. I'm a teacher. I'm a principal. But by goodness, I'm looking at it from a different point of view. And back to one of the very first questions, the skills and attributes. I'm looking at it from such a different point of view that I guarantee you, when people who say, but Phil, you don't understand how the thing works. I understand how it works, and guess what? It's broken. So how about you try something new? How about you try something different? We are going to win this race this time. We've got wonderful people running for this office, and I have the deepest respect for all of them. And I have the deepest respect for all of those BPOU chairs and deputy chairs that are working their tails off. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to come at this whole campaign from a different angle, and the respect you've demonstrated for me. But we're going to win this campaign. And one of these 4 individuals is going to be the lieutenant governor as well. We're going to form a coalition that's going to take this state by storm. There's a wave coming across this state that nobody really understands is happening. The wave that's coming across this state that Donald Trump started. And you know what? I even want to take a little credit from 2014 from the state Senate, the United States Senate race that I ran. And I stood on that stage and the crowd was on their feet for several minutes when I was done. That's not about me. That's about you. It's about people tapping into what you're relating to, what you're seeing the truth on the ground. What my campaign team is seeing across the state, it's real. The concerns that people have are real, and we're addressing those concerns. Every single one of my team members is a volunteer. We are the purest grassroots team out there. And it's really exciting because we have got some really wonderful people gravitating towards this campaign. If you think this campaign can't win, you're going to be disappointed. We're going to beat it. We're going to win it. And you're going to get excited at the state convention, and we're going to pull ourselves together, and we're going to have the most unified state convention that's ever happened in Minnesota. I look forward to seeing you and talking with you. Jump on the website.
A woman came up to me at the state fair, made a beeline towards me from across the street up to my booth that I had down there, and she came right up, kind of in my face, and she started telling me about her circumstances and how she had lost her 2 small businesses. She lived in St. Paul, the taxes and the regulations, and then Obamacare came along, and she couldn't hold on. And by the time she was done, she had tears welling up in her eyes, and you could tell this was a matter of dignity for her, not just an economic issue. And she said to me, "Will you fight for me?" And I looked at her and said, 8 years of politics, no one has ever said, "Will you fight for me?" She said, "Will you fight for me? Because if you do, there are so many of us out here, and we'll be with you." And I realized that that's the essence of this election. That is the essence of what happened in 2016, and it is still what's in the electorate right now. I hope I've shown you in the debate or the forum tonight that I've got the policy proposals, and I have the ideas, and I'm willing to be bold and put them out there. All the policy ideas aren't going to win this election. And I got to tell you, all the speeches and the op-eds and the vision statements and all this stuff, it doesn't win the election. People want to know that you're going to fight for them and that you're on their side. That is what this election is about. And so we have a chance as Republicans, if we're bold, if we're willing to go out there and tell them exactly what we think, exactly what we're going to do, why it's good for them, and present a fundamentally conservative agenda that pushes Minnesota in the right direction, and we do it because we're on their side, because we believe in them, and we trust in Minnesotans, not bigger government for our future, we can go talk to the people in the urban core and tell them, "I believe in you, and that's why I trust you with the voucher for education." Go talk to the people who are struggling under the cost of health care and tell them, "We got a bold plan to fix it." Go talk to the business people who can't stay here or expand their farm or hand it on to the next generation. Tell them, "We're going to fix that." The theme of my campaign is to make Minnesota work for everyone. We're building something called Team Minnesota, a group of 16 coalitions where we're going to bring that message across the state. We're already starting now. We can't spend the first 9 months of this campaign just giving our 3-minute stump speeches at conventions and BPOU meetings. We got to get out in front of the people of Minnesota and tell them, we believe in you, we trust in Minnesota, not bigger government for our future. And when we do, we can win. And when we win, I have this picture of our next governor, hopefully me, stepping up to the State of the State microphone, looking the people of Minnesota in the eye and say, "You know what? I told you everything I was going to do. We're going to do it, and it's for you because we believe in you and we trust in you, and we're going to do it. We're going to fight the entrenched interests. We're going to fight the bureaucracy. We're going to do it because we believe in you and we trust in you." If you want that kind of a candidate and that kind of a governor, I'd love to have your support.
So I want to close with something that happened recently that I think really illustrates the importance of this race to me. I was Christmas shopping for my wife Sandy 2 days before Christmas, which was earlier than usual, and I was at the mall, and I went into a store, saw a friend of mine who was at the counter being waited on by a young woman, and so I went over to say hi, and she introduced me to the woman who was helping her. Her name was Rebecca, and Rebecca was not our typical demographic as conservative Republicans. She was probably 22 or 23 years old. She kind of had a goth look to her. She had long black hair with some purple in it, and dark lipstick, and earrings in places that were not ears. And my friend said, "Well, this is Jeff Johnson. He's running for governor." And Rebecca said, "Oh, I saw your commercial where you crashed the party at the governor's mansion," which was our announcement video, actually. She said, "I'm voting for you." And I hate to say I was surprised, but I was a little surprised. So I engaged her and eventually said, "What was it about that video that made you interested in my campaign?" And she said, "Well, I've never voted before, and we probably don't agree on a lot of things, but those things don't matter to me all that much. I'm a single mom with a 6-year-old daughter. We live in kind of a crappy apartment in Minneapolis. My daughter goes to a school that's not very good in a poor neighborhood, but I can't afford to give her anything better than that. I work this job full time, and then some nights I work as a waitress at a bar, so my daughter spends most of her time with her grandma, or in an in-home daycare that I'm not very excited about, but with the help of government, that's what I can afford. And the only thing that matters to me is that she doesn't turn out like I did," which kind of makes your heart skip a beat, right? But she said, everything that's gone wrong in my life, I want to go right for her, and I want her to have opportunities that I never had. And she said, I watched your video, and you said you're not going to get distracted by politics, and your most important goal is to make sure that every single Minnesotan has opportunities for a better life. And she said, I actually believed you, and it's all that matters to me. That's what we get to give to people when we win. A little bit of freedom, a little bit of opportunity, a little bit of hope. The Democrats have become so obsessed with their ridiculous fringy issues that they've completely lost track of what matters to Minnesotans, especially Minnesotans who are struggling. And if we can get that message out with a messenger who can actually reach non-Republicans, we won't just win in November. Much more importantly, we are going to be able to make life better in real ways for millions of Americans, like Rebecca. That's why I'm so excited about this campaign, and that's why I believe we'll win. So I'm seeking your endorsement. I will abide by that endorsement, and I hope to earn your support. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Matt Deedy, Senate District 35. Thanks, Kathy Tinglestead, for keeping time. Awesome job. Way to go. We kicked off my campaign at my dad's bar on Rice Street this summer, and we've had a great time. We then went to the state fair where I spent all 12 days, heard from people all over the state, got in my car the day after the fair, started heading out to 87 counties in the next 87 days. We wrapped up at the Mall of America with Senator Rick Santorum coming in to kind of kick off the month of December. We finished up in Brainerd at the State Central Committee, winning the straw poll. We've been gaining momentum in all 8 congressional districts with a lot of hard work and a lot of listening. And it kind of goes all the way back a couple of years ago to a woman that really people didn't listen to a whole lot. She didn't really have a lot of people listening to her. Her name was Katie. I met her up at Hugo. And I was talking to her, and I thought, this woman's a Republican. She's on my side, and I could kind of tell she was on my side. And I said, we got to take the state back. And she looked at me and she said, you know, that's the problem with you people. Whoops. She said, you know, the Republicans keep taking the state back from the Democrats, and the Democrats keep taking it back from the Republicans, and we never get it. And she was the person that Donald Trump was listening to that nobody else was. And we got to figure that out. If our message as Republicans is we're good, they're bad, we're smart, they're dumb, we're going to figure it out, they're not, we're going to make fun of them, we're going to go on Twitter and we're going to make their lives horrible, they don't care. Minnesotans deserve better than that. And we deserve to give them something better than that. We need to unify this state, and our next governor needs to unify this next state, and I can do that. But first I have to unify the Republican Party, and we have to figure out, number one, that we want to win, and number two, that we can win. And if we give them a campaign that is deserving of all of your effort, we are going to win that debate. If we give them a campaign that is deserving of our honor, we will win that debate, and we will win this election. We can bring the state and our party together behind our shared principles. We don't have to run away from our principles to win. We can run on our principles, and if we do, we will win. But if we divide ourselves, and if we fall victim to the traps that are along the way in campaigns, we won't. So I really thank you in advance for all of the work that you're going to do for our endorsed candidate. I hope it's me. If it's not me, I'll support whoever it is, because I honor the work of the delegates and the work of this party. I think it's the best hope for the future of the state of Minnesota. My name is Matt Dean. I'm asking for your endorsement. I'm asking for your help. Join the best grassroots team in the state. Go to Matt Dean for governor. Look forward to your support. Look forward to your help for all candidates on the Republican ticket. Thanks so much for having us here tonight.
Wow. I want to just take a moment to thank all of you. Your answers this evening were articulate, they were unique, they were thoughtful, and they were passionate. I think that you took the time to share with each of us your personalities and why you decided to run for governor. And after listening to each of you, I think any one of you would be a phenomenal candidate, and I would like to ask the audience to join me in thanking you for taking the time tonight. with that, we're finished, and I think we'll invite the candidates to head back to their tables. If you'd like to visit with them for a few minutes, that would be great.
That was good.
It was just whispered in my ear that we have until about 9 o'clock.